When you look at a massive industrial flywheel,
Right.
like one of those giant solid steel wheels spinning in the center of a factory floor, it looks entirely unstoppable. I mean, the physics of it are just terrifying.
Oh, absolutely. The sheer mass of it.
Yeah, we are talking about tons of sheer mass moving with incredible velocity. If you were to just stand in front of it, it would absolutely crush you without even slowing down.
It wouldn't even register you.
Exactly. It looks like a permanent, unyielding force of nature.
And well, the momentum creates this illusion of complete independence, right? You
Yeah.
look at it and your brain just assumes the machine is generating its own immense power simply by virtue of its size.
Right. But the secret of the flywheel is that it doesn't actually power itself. It requires a continuous microscopic transfer of energy. There's a belt, a small motor, a constant feed of electricity.
A continuous input.
Yes, a constant feed. And if you drop the power supply to that motor by even a fraction, eventually, that terrifying, unstoppable wheel just grinds to a complete halt.
It just stops.
It stops. Because it is completely dependent on the energy being fed into it by thousands of smaller, unnoticed components. And, over our last few deep dives, we have been staring at an economic flywheel in southern Africa that looks exactly like that.
Unstoppable.
Completely unstoppable. We've looked at the massive regional monopolies, the structural inequalities, and the sheer momentum of an economic model that is designed to crush the majority of the people standing near it.
We really have. We've spent hours, so many hours, establishing the heavy mathematical realities of this region.
Yeah, the data is just grim.
It is. We leaned heavily on the demographic data and the complex frameworks provided in our previous sources. But today, well, our mission shifts a bit.
Right, because we're focusing on the final drop of documents.
Exactly. We're focusing entirely on the final set of documents we've been provided. It's a manifesto referred to in the source material simply as the text.
The text.
Yeah, specifically Articles 31, 32, and 33. And the authors of these articles, the collective known as the 30K Club, they assume you already know the grim statistics.
They aren't trying to convince you the problem exists anymore.
No, they are no longer interested in diagnosing the problem. Their goal today, their entire focus in these articles, is to answer the ultimate practical question.
Which is, what do we do next?
Exactly. What is the actual actionable next step?
And the hook of these final articles is just wild. I mean, these texts don't ask politely for systemic change. They completely dismantle the idea of peaceful protests.
They tear it apart.
They do. They call out the concept of the neutral bystander as an absolute myth. And they offer what they claim is a radical, immediate blueprint for total economic rebellion.
It's a very aggressive stance.
It is. But to understand the sheer aggression of this manifesto, we have to remember the pressure cooker these authors are responding to.
We have to keep the context in mind.
Right. We need to ground ourselves in the math again. Let's look closely at the realities established in the prior data, because the text argues that this specific arithmetic is the engine of the entire regional crisis.
Yeah, we must keep these numbers front and center. Because you forget the math, the text sounds like hyperbole.
Exactly.
So across the 10 southern African nations evaluated in the data, we are looking at a combined population of over 212 million people.
212 million.
Right. And out of that broader population, there's an incoming youth generation, what they call a massive youth bulge, of 68.6 million young people.
Wow.
And they are staring down a labor market that is not just stagnant, but structurally hostile to their entry.
68.6 million. Let's just sit with that for a second. That's not just a demographic shift,
No, it's unprecedented.
If you try to visualize that number, it's an incoming tidal wave of human potential, ambition, and necessity, and it's hitting a solid concrete wall of unemployment.
And the sources map out the specific affordability tiers within that broader population, too.
Right, the daily survival rates.
Yes. Out of the 212 million, an estimated 110 to 125 million people are mathematically trapped, surviving on merely $1 to $2.15 a day.
A day. $2 a day.
A day.
To put that in perspective for you listening, we looked at the Peter Maritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity Group data in South Africa.
And the Jesuit Center for Theological Reflection data in Zambia, too.
Right, both of them. And they calculate the absolute basic cost of human dignity. And I want to be clear, this isn't a luxury budget.
No, not at all.
This is the minimum required for a nutritional food basket. We're talking maize meal, cooking oil, beans, maybe some basic protein, plus the absolute bare minimum for transport just to go look for work.
And basic electricity for heating or cooking.
Exactly. And that dignity basket requires $11 to $15 a day.
And that discrepancy right there between those two figures is the entire structural trap.
The gap between $2 and $15.
Yes. The basic needs basket requires up to $15 a day, but the majority of the population has, at best, $2. And the text insists we recognize that this is not a temporary dip in personal finances.
It's a permanent state of deficit.
Exactly. It means that no matter how hard an individual works in the informal sector, like selling goods by the roadside, or even working an entry-level formal job at minimum wage.
They are mathematically guaranteed to go backward every single month.
Yes, they are forced to survive by making impossible choices. Skipping meals to pay for transport, defaulting on informal debt to buy medicine, or forfeiting healthcare entirely just to keep the lights on.
While at the exact same time, in the exact same geographic space, South Africa possesses a Gini coefficient of 0.81.
Which is staggering.
It is. And for anyone unfamiliar with that metric, a Gini coefficient measures wealth inequality on a scale from 0 to 1. 0 means perfect equality, where everyone has the exact same wealth.
And 1 means perfect inequality.
Right, where a single person holds all the wealth and everyone else has 0. So a score of 0.81 makes it statistically the most unequal society on the face of the earth.
It's an incredibly stark reality.
The regional wealth is fiercely consolidated among roughly 48,000 millionaires.
And the new source material contextualizes this extreme disparity in a very specific way. The authors of the text insist that we cannot view this massive inequality as a bug in the system.
Like it's just a mistake they're trying to fix.
Exactly, or some sort of failure of the developing market. They argue it is the intended design of the system.
Intended design, that's a heavy accusation.
It is. They say the region operates on a dual paradigm. The ultra-wealthy exist in a completely privatized reality.
Right.
They rely on private power grids, private medical facilities, armed private security, and offshore wealth management.
Well, the rest of the country is completely cut off from that.
Right. The masses, meanwhile, exist in a failing public sector paradigm, entirely exposed to rolling blackouts, collapsing infrastructure, and hyperinflation.
You know, the best way to visualize this isn't a rigged casino. I think that's too much about luck. It's much closer to the old company store model from the Industrial Revolution.
Oh, the company store. That's a great analogy.
Yeah, imagine working in a coal mine where the company pays you in scrip. You know, a currency only valid at the store, owned by that exact same mining company.
Right, you can't spend it anywhere else.
Right. So you buy your groceries, your tools, and your rent from the monopoly. Even if you work 80 hours a week, the prices at the store are mathematically calibrated so that your wages never quite cover your living expenses.
So you constantly owe them.
Exactly. You go into debt to the company just to survive. The money you earn instantly leaves your pocket and goes right back to the monopoly. The bucket has a massive hole in it, and the velocity of money leaving the community is immediate and complete.
And the authors of the original sources actually termed this specific dynamic the mathematics of false hope.
The mathematics of false hope, man.
Yeah, if you are operating within a company's store model, working harder within that model will not liberate you.
Because the prices just go up.
Exactly. Waiting for the owners of the company's store to suddenly lower prices out of the goodness of their hearts is absurd. The system is functioning exactly as it was designed to.
Which brings us to the political reality of it all. Because the sources argue that regional elections have basically been reduced to a theater of what they call stomach politics.
Stomach politics.
Right, which is such a visceral phrase.
The argument presented is that elected politicians do not actually hold the deep structural economic power required to change these realities.
The politicians don't even have the power.
No, true power. The power over major resource extraction, pricing, and labor value that remains in the hands of entrenched monopolies, multinational conglomerates, and the globalized market.
So the politicians are just middlemen.
Essentially, yes. Because politicians cannot offer structural economic liberation, they campaign on immediate survival. They offer temporary social grants, braided T-shirts, small food parcels before an election.
Literally handing out food to get a vote.
Or minor, localized infrastructural fixes. That is stomach politics. It addresses the immediate hunger of today while leaving the structural starvation of tomorrow completely intact.
So if the math is a trap, and the politicians are just administering the trap, waiting for a savior becomes a lethal strategy.
It's the worst thing you can do.
And that seamlessly sets up the radical, uncompromising premise of Article 33. Let's look directly at the text. Article 33 is titled The Illusion of the Savior.
The illusion of the savior.
Yeah. And the very first sentence hits like a freight train. The authors describe passive hope as the most dangerous narcotic in southern Africa today.
The most dangerous narcotic. The authors chose the word narcotic with clinical precision there.
Yeah, why narcotic specifically?
Because a narcotic does not cure a disease,
Yeah.
right? It merely numbs the pain receptors in the brain while the disease continues to ravage the body.
Wow. Yeah, that makes sense.
The text claims that the masses sit in their individual silos, watching their public infrastructure physically crumble, watching trillions of dollars in resource wealth, minerals, agriculture, labor value just vanish overseas.
And what do?
And in response, they simply hope.
They just hope it gets better.
Yes. They hope the next election cycle will bring a more benevolent leader. They hope a new corporate investment will magically trickle down and alter their daily reality.
And the text argues that the power-hungry elite actually want the public to be waiting and passive. Like, it's not a side effect. It is a carefully cultivated state.
Oh, excellent.
It is highly beneficial for the monopolies if the population is perpetually waiting.
Because passivity prevents organization. The rationale provided in the text is really straightforward. If an individual believes that an external force like a politician, a global NGO, a multinational corporation is coming to save them, they will avoid taking the terrifying, risky steps required to save themselves.
Right. Why take a massive risk if help is on the way?
Exactly. They will not organize their community. They will not pool their meager resources to build independent structures. They will simply stand in line and cast a ballot, or stand in line and submit a resume to the very entities extracting their wealth.
It's the psychology of outsourcing our salvation. By outsourcing our economic deliverance to these massive institutions, we effectively absolve ourselves of the responsibility to act.
We let ourselves off the hook.
Yeah. If the local economy is failing, it's very comfortable to say, well, the government is failing us, or, the global market is tough right now. It places the blame on an untouchable, abstract entity.
But the authors of Article 33 reframe this dynamic entirely. They do not view this merely as an economic oversight.
What do they view it as?
They frame it as a profound spiritual failure.
A spiritual failure.
Yes. The text states that by ignoring the inherent human mandate to govern your own land and your own economy, the population is effectively handing the keys of life and death over to ruthless, unfeeling cartels.
That is intense.
It is. The authors demand that the readers stop viewing their economic environment as something that happens to them, like bad weather, and start viewing it as something they are actively permitting to exist through their daily compliance.
There is a striking line in Article 33 that makes this incredibly personal.
Which line?
The authors write, "Every single day, you cast a vote for your future by choosing where you spend your money and where you deploy your mind."
Wow.
Think about the weight of that statement. We usually conceptualize voting as a civic duty. We perform every 4 or 5 years at a ballot box, right?
A very contained event.
But the text argues that your daily habits are the true election.
The text demands an immediate shift in perspective, forcing the individual to collapse the distance between their mundane daily actions and the macroeconomic reality of the region.
So let's apply this to a real-world scenario. Let's say you are listening to this on your way to a corporate job in Sandton, or if you are buying your groceries from one of the 4 massive supermarket chains that control the regional food supply.
Okay.
The text is pointing a finger directly at your steering wheel and your wallet.
It really is.
Clicking apply on a corporate job board for a massive monopoly isn't framed as a neutral act of just trying to pay your bills.
Not at all.
The text argues that offering your intelligence, your time, and your physical labor to these structures is a structural endorsement of the very system that is actively keeping the broader community in poverty.
Yes.
And buying your groceries from a centralized monopoly that aggressively suppresses local agriculture is a financial vote to sustain the oppressor.
The text is aggressively challenging the comfort of the modern hustler or, the exhausted corporate employee.
It takes away any excuse.
It attempts to strip away the illusion of the independent actor, forcing the individual to confront the possibility that they are not just victims of this economic matrix, they are the active batteries powering it.
The battery's powering the flywheel.
Exactly.
But wait, If we recognize that politicians are powerless and waiting for a savior is a narcotic, the immediate reflex for most people is to just put their heads down, stay out of trouble, and survive.
That's the natural human response.
Does the text allow for that? What about the person who says, look, I don't follow politics, I'm not an activist, I'm just keeping my head down and doing my job?
Well, the text leaves absolutely no room for that position. Article 31 provides a brutal assessment of the neutral bystander.
Brutal is the right word.
And I use the word brutal intentionally because the authors systematically dismantle the idea that middle ground even exists.
Let's look closely at the mechanics of this argument. Article 31 is titled The Complicity of Silence.
The complicity of silence.
The text presents a stark, uncompromising binary. It points back to the cold data. Trillions in wealth are extracted by monopolies that have zero regard for the people who make those businesses thrive.
Right.
And the authors frame this destructiveness not as a political opinion or a socialist critique, but as an undeniable mathematical reality. The text states, to state that these corporate empires do not care about us and that monopoly is a path of death is not a radical political accusation. It is a mathematical fact.
By framing the extraction as a mathematical fact, the 30K Club authors are attempting to remove the emotional and ideological debate from the issue.
They're saying just look at the numbers.
Exactly. They're directing the reader to look at the extraction rate, the poverty rate, and the basic needs basket deficit. The math proves the system results in structural starvation.
It's right there on the spreadsheet.
Yes. Therefore, the authors conclude that the greatest tragedy isn't the extraction itself, because a parasite will always extract by its very nature.
Right. That's what parasites do.
The greatest tragedy is the conscious silence of the extracted population.
The text declares that there is no such thing as a neutral bystander. If you understand this massive injustice and you consciously choose to do nothing, you are not neutral.
No, you're complicit.
The text says you are actively supporting the power-hungry systems that are starving your bloodline. But let me play devil's advocate here because I can hear the listener practically yelling at their device right now.
I'm sure they are.
Are you telling me this text is blaming the exhausted single mother in Johannesburg or Lusaka who takes a grueling 9-to-5 job at a multinational mining corporation just to pay her exorbitant rent and keep her kids in school?
It's a tough pill to swallow.
Is the text really saying she is willingly feeling the beast that bites her? Isn't that the ultimate form of victim blaming? I mean, how can you fault a starving person for taking crumbs from the only bakery in town?
It is a profoundly uncomfortable accusation. Analyzing the text objectively, we see that the authors are not ignorant of the deep pain and the exhaustion of the working class.
They know it's hard.
They do. However, they view this accusation as a harsh, unyielding, but entirely necessary awakening. The text is attempting to aggressively strip away the psychological defense mechanisms that individuals use to justify their ongoing participation in a corrupt system.
A psychological defense mechanism like saying, I have no choice, so I have no responsibility.
Exactly that sentiment. If an individual convinces themselves they have no choice, they are completely absolved of guilt.
They can sleep at night.
Right. But the 30K Club text argues that the act of seeking a job within these power-hungry structures is the precise mechanism that keeps the structures alive.
Because they need the labor.
Monopolies require massive amounts of cheap labor, but more importantly, they require brilliant, localized intelligence to maintain their subjugation of the region.
Oh, the localized intelligence, that's key.
They need local managers, local engineers, local logistics experts. When a citizen offers them a resume, they are offering the exact fuel the machine needs to keep running.
So the text isn't blaming the victim for experiencing hunger?
No, it is pointing out that the victim is continuously sharpening the very knife the oppressor holds.
You are willingly offering them the very labor and intelligence they need to maintain your subjugation. That completely reframes the entire concept of rebellion.
How so?
Because usually when we think of fighting back against an unjust system, we think of civic action, right? We think of protests, taking to the streets, demanding our rights.
Right, visible disruption.
But the text explicitly declares the era of protesting to be entirely dead.
Dead. Entirely dead.
It says that marching in the streets with placards is, and I'm quoting directly here, begging oppressors for slightly better chains.
Begging oppressors for slightly better chains. That is a devastating critique of modern civic action.
It really is.
If we contextualize this within the recent political unrest in the region, mass protests where citizens face tear gas and state violence to demand change.
He's risking their lives.
The 30K Club's text asks a very cynical question. What are they actually demanding?
Right.
From the author's perspective, the protesters are merely demanding that the monopolies give them a slightly larger slice of their own stolen resources.
They want to raise, basically.
They are demanding that the oppressor become slightly more benevolent, rather than dismantling the oppressor entirely.
The text insists you don't defeat a monopoly by yelling at its headquarters. Holding a cardboard sign outside a glass boardroom where the executives are insulated by private security and offshore accounts, it accomplishes nothing.
It's just noise to them.
Right. You defeat a monopoly by starting it.
Total withdrawal of economic participation.
Total withdrawal.
Protests do not dismantle monopolies. Systematically withdrawing your labor, your localized intelligence, and your consumer spending does.
Starve the flywheel.
Exactly. The text argues that true rebellion is not a vocal march. It is a silent, structural refusal to participate.
It's silent.
The authors demand that the population stop begging the monopoly to sustain them and start taking a solid, uncompromising stand on the side of building a new economic civilization.
Okay, let's test that theory in the real world. Total withdrawal. Starving the monopoly. It sounds incredibly empowering when you read it on a page.
In theory, yes.
But let's go back to my exhausted 9-to-5 worker. If she withdraws from the current system, if she quits her corporate job and stops shopping at the mega supermarket, where does she go?
That's the problem.
Her kids still need school fees tomorrow morning. You can't just step out of the macroeconomic matrix into a void. If the text demands we abandon the company store, what alternative structure does it offer?
Well, the authors of the text are acutely aware of that vulnerability. They aren't foolish. They know that a purely destructive boycott, without an alternative infrastructure ready to catch the falling population, simply leads to mass starvation.
Right. The poorest suffer first.
To answer the question of where do we go, Article 32 argues that the region must look backward in order to move forward. They introduce what they call the ancient blueprint.
The ancient blueprint. Article 32 provides fascinating historical context on this. The text reminds the reader that Southern Africa was not always a continent of beggars, informal traders, and desperate job seekers.
Right, that's a recent development.
That is a modern, manufactured condition. It states that centuries before the modern corporate matrix was forced upon the region, the ancestors built magnificent, thriving civilizations, and they did it based on a very specific economic triad.
The historical reality supports this heavily. If we look at pre-colonial economic hubs like Mapagubwe or Great Zimbabwe,
Oh, Great Zimbabwe, yeah.
these were incredibly complex societies. They traded gold and ivory on a global scale with merchants from India and the Arab world, yet they maintained localized control.
They were connected but independent.
Exactly. The text outlines their economic triad as communal ritual, profound spiritual grounding, and the absolute ownership of their own land and assets.
They ate from what they cultivated, and they built for their descendants. That's the quote. The text argues that the monopolies of today didn't just steal the physical land, the copper, and the diamonds.
No, the theft went much deeper.
Right, they actively stole this spiritual blueprint. They systematically erased the memory of self-reliance, replacing it with the trauma of dependency on corporate structures.
The text frames dependency not merely as an economic disadvantage, but as a deep spiritual violation.
A spiritual violation.
Yes. In our previous analysis of the 30K Club's broader philosophy, we noted that they view enterprise through a deeply spiritual lens.
Right, business and spirituality are linked for them.
They argue that true wealth requires a spiritual infrastructure. By forcing the population into a paradigm where they are completely reliant on a centralized, soulless corporation for their daily survival.
The company store again.
Exactly. The monopoly has severed the people from their ancestral spiritual mandate to govern their own assets. Dependency is framed as a form of spiritual starvation.
And this realization leads to the ultimate hidden weakness of the monopolies.
Yes, the big reveal.
The authors point out a strategic insight that shifts the entire balance of power. They state, the elite monopolies share a terrifying weakness. They produce nothing on their own.
It is a profound observation when you really think about it. Every skyscraper in the financial district of Johannesburg,
Yeah.
every massive corporate dividend extracted from the copper belt in Zambia or the diamond mines in Botswana, every ounce of corporate wealth is built entirely on the backs of the masses' physical labor, continuous consumer support, and localized intelligence.
The monopoly itself is merely a shell.
It is a legal conduit.
Right.
It possesses no inherent magical power other than what is freely given to it every single day by the population it exploits.
And we are right back to the industrial flywheel.
The flywheel, exactly.
The monopoly is the massive, terrifying steel wheel. It looks unstoppable, but it has no internal engine. It is completely powered by the daily, microscopic inputs of millions of exhausted workers and consumers feeding it energy.
And the text states clearly, if we make the conscious decision to withdraw that support, the monopolies will collapse under their own weight.
Just collapse.
The power is not something that needs to be taken back violently. The power is already residing in the hands of the people. It is simply misdirected.
Misdirected energy.
Right. The moment the masses consciously redirect their intelligence, their labor, and their consumer spending away from the oppressor and pour it into decentralized community-owned enterprises, monopolies vanish.
The text says the puppets of these power-hungry systems will be rapidly exposed and dismantled. Once you stop looking at the distraction, the stomach politics, the political theater,
Right.
and you look at the actual mechanism of money flow, the illusion of the monopoly's power just shatters.
But this brings us to the ultimate pragmatic hurdle.
Always a catch.
Recognizing that the ancient blueprint exists and recognizing that the monopoly is fundamentally vulnerable is one thing. But practically executing a mass withdrawal without plunging your own community into absolute destitution is the true challenge.
Right.
How do you build an alternative economy while the monopoly currently controls the food supply?
And this transition is exactly where the 30K Club inserts itself as the ultimate bypass. The authors of the text don't just offer lofty philosophical ideals about ancestral blueprints.
They have a plan.
They acknowledge the immediate physical danger of rebellion. Let's examine Section 5 of the text, the First Commandment and the 30K Club solution.
Article 32 establishes the first commandment of sacred enterprise.
A business must serve humanity and empower the community that sustains it. That is their foundational law. If a business does not adhere to that principle, it is considered a killing order or a path of death and must be starved.
The deep pragmatism of the text shines through in how they propose to enforce this commandment. The authors explicitly acknowledge that trying to starve out a massive, entrenched monopoly by starting a grassroots economy completely from scratch is, well, in their own words, a long, agonizing suffering that many cannot bear.
Because grassroots boycotts disproportionately hurt the poorest first.
Always.
If a community decides to boycott a massive corporate mega farm, the wealthy CEO sitting in a boardroom loses a fraction of a % of his annual bonus.
He barely notices.
Exactly. But the minimum wage farm worker from that community loses their job immediately and their family starves that very week. Grassroots rebellion without capital is historically soaked in the blood and suffering of the working class.
The 30K Club asserts that this agonizing suffering is no longer a requirement for liberation.
That's a huge claim.
It is. They enter this narrative not as traditional political activists, but as heavily armed economic architects.
Heavily armed with capital.
Exactly. They aren't asking the exhausted, underfunded population to suffer through a decade-long boycott. Instead, the text claims that the 30K Club is actively deploying hundreds of millions in capital to provide the massive funding and, crucially, the ritual backing required to entirely bypass the suffering phase.
Okay, we need to pause here and really look at the mechanics of what they are claiming.
It's complex.
They're saying, don't try to fight a billion-dollar monopoly with pennies and a cardboard sign.
Right.
We will hand you millions of dollars and the spiritual infrastructure to protect it so you can instantly launch your own competing decentralized empire.
To understand this, we must analyze the two pillars of their solution: the capital injection and the ritual backing.
Right, those two pillars.
By offering massive capital injections, the 30K Club claims to offer the exact same tools of empire that the elite have historically hoarded.
Using the master's tools to dismantle the house.
In a way, yes, but they are offering them under a strict moral mandate. However, the capital alone is not enough, according to the text. It must be paired with ritual backing.
We need to define ritual backing clearly because the text mentions it repeatedly. It sounds esoteric, almost like literal magic.
It does sound like that.
But looking closely at the context of the club's operations, what does it actually mean in a functional economic sense?
Well, in traditional banking, if you want capital to start a business, the bank requires physical collateral, a house, a car, land.
Right.
If your business fails, or if you default, the bank seizes your assets. It is a purely transactional, highly adversarial relationship.
They win, you lose.
Right. The 30K Club's concept of ritual backing functions as a radical alternative to traditional collateral.
How so?
It involves deep communal trust, rigorous psychological vetting, and shared, unbreakable oaths of accountability. The ritual is the process of binding an individual to a profound moral and spiritual mandate.
So it's not physical property.
No. If an initiated member receives capital, their collateral isn't their house. It is their standing within the community, their adherence to the oath, and the collective spiritual weight of the club holding them accountable. It functions as an incredibly powerful economic moat, ensuring the capital is never diverted to greed.
So what does a decentralized empire actually look like when it's built with this capital and this ritual backing? Because the word empire usually implies a centralized power hoarding everything at the top.
In the context of sacred enterprise, as outlined in these sources, a decentralized empire completely inverts the traditional corporate model.
Okay.
Instead of a single headquarters extracting profit from 1,000 regional branches, the capital is injected into individual nodes, what the text calls true creators.
True creators.
Yes. These are initiated members who have received the funding and the ritual backing, but they are commanded by their oath to empower their immediate radius.
It connects back to the intensely strict rules of the club we saw in earlier sources. The members survive their own financial success by actively decentralizing their monopolies.
Exactly. If an architect receives millions to build an agricultural hub, they don't hoard the profits. They're mandated to sponsor local artists, fund localized infrastructure, and empower community leaders.
They distribute the power outward.
Yes. The text argues that this specific mechanism is how you build a society bound together by clean, communal ritual and unshakable economic independence.
Unshakable economic independence.
When a localized community is entirely economically independent, growing its own food, generating its own power, funding its own education, and spiritually grounded in a shared mandate, it cannot be blackmailed by a monopoly.
Because they don't need the company store anymore.
Exactly. The text claims that this unshakable independence inherently exposes and dismantles the elite's puppets. The political proxies who rely on the population's poverty to win elections with food parcels suddenly have absolutely no leverage.
Because you can't buy a vote with a bag of maize if the community already owns the farm.
Precisely.
We provide the massive capital and the ritual backing to bypass the suffering. We are moving beyond survival. That is an incredibly seductive proposition for a region where 110 million people are mathematically trapped in a survival loop.
It is a lifeline.
They are offering a funded operational portal out of the company store.
Which brings us to the culmination of the entire document.
The end game.
With the mathematical problem defined, the false solutions of passive hope and begging protest discarded, and the actual ancestral blueprint laid out and allegedly funded by the 30K Club. All that remains is the reader's immediate choice.
By the end of these 3 articles, if you are reading them, you are effectively backed into a corner. But it's almost like being backed into a corner in a good way. The illusions are gone, the narcotic has worn off.
The text states the final mandate with absolute clarity. You must consciously decide what kind of environment you intend to live in and align your daily actions to build it.
Align your daily actions.
The authors remove any remaining room for the excuse of ignorance.
But there is a very critical nuance here that we have to highlight. Throughout this journey, we've talked a lot about the intense, often terrifying requirements of joining the 30K Club itself.
The inner sanctum, yes.
We've talked about the vetting process, the oath of self-accountability, the spiritual liability of handling that much capital. And a listener might be thinking, look, I agree with the economics entirely, the system is rigged, but I am not ready to take a literal spiritual oath and handle millions of dollars. I'm not ready to be an architect of an empire.
Right, that's a massive leap. And the text anticipates and directly addresses that exact hesitation in Article 33. The authors clarify, we do not ask everyone to take the absolute burden of the oath.
Okay, so there is an alternative.
Yes. They acknowledge that not everyone is built to step into the intense responsibility of an initiated architect. You do not necessarily have to become a formal member of the club to be a vital part of the solution.
You don't have to be the one building the system.
No. The club needs heavily armed architects to build the infrastructure, yes. But the new civilization desperately needs conscious citizens to populate it.
Even if you never step foot inside the inner sanctum, you have a moral obligation to consciously choose who you support. That is the absolute baseline requirement for anyone who understands the math.
The mandate is that you must make a conscious, daily choice about which system you sustain with your energy. You must refuse to be a willing, silent victim.
Right.
If you are not going to take the capital and build the new decentralized structures yourself, you must at least redirect your daily economic energy
Your grocery purchases, your employment, your brilliant localized intelligence.
toward the independent, community-driven enterprises that others are building. You must stop feeding the monopolies flywheel.
Think about the reality we've unpacked today. If you are listening to this, there are no barriers left to your understanding. You know the math.
The undeniable math.
You know that 68.6 million young people are staring at a brick wall. You know that the basic needs basket is mathematically out of reach for the vast majority of the region. You understand the structural extraction that keeps the company store running.
It's all laid out.
And, according to the unforgiving logic of this text, that silence and compliance are active forms of complicity.
The authors leave the reader with a final, empowering assertion. No one is coming to save us.
No one is coming.
They forcibly remove the narcotic of passive hope. But in the exact same breath, they provide the alternative. We hold the capital. We hold the blueprint.
We hold the capital.
They replace the despair of waiting with the active, funded execution of a new reality.
The text leaves you with a final mandate. It tells you that the time for waiting is over. It demands that you stop supporting your own destruction. It asks you to withdraw your genius, your hard work, and your brilliant mind from the systems that are designed to extract your wealth and starve your bloodline.
It's a call to arms, economically speaking.
The manifesto ends with that recurring, echoing invitation. The portal is open at 30k.club.
It is a profoundly radical manifesto for total economic secession.
Truly.
Whether one believes in the spiritual efficacy of their ritual backing or not, the socioeconomic logic they present regarding monopolies, extraction, and the mathematics of false hope is structurally sound and deeply challenging to the global status quo.
They are forcing an entire region to look in the mirror and recognize their own hidden power. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the 30K Club's final text. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with a lingering thought. Something to mull over tomorrow morning while you're commuting, or drinking your coffee, or looking at your banking app. We talked about the giant, unstoppable flywheel. The text insists that the monopolies, the massive corporations, the unfeeling cartels, they actually produce nothing on their own.
Nothing.
They rely entirely on our daily habits, our unquestioning labor, and our silent complicity to survive. So, what happens to the global balance of power tomorrow morning if even just 10% of us wake up and decide to consciously redirect our intelligence and our money away from them?
It's just 10%.
If just 10% of the population recognizes the company store for what it is, unplugs their energy from the machine, and reinvests it into their own localized community, are we, the so-called exhausted masses, actually vastly more powerful than we've been conditioned to believe?
It's a powerful question.
Thank you so much for joining us on this intense, comprehensive journey through the economic reality of Southern Africa and the revolutionary claims of the 30K Club's text. Stay curious, stay disciplined, and remember, every single choice you make today is a vote for the future. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.